Hi everyone, Crista Cowan here with another episode of The Barefoot Genealogist. Today we are talking about New England birth, marriage, and death records. If you had the opportunity to watch Who Do You Think You Are this week, you know that Cindy Crawford went to Boston and met with some people at the New England Historical Genealogical Society. They have a huge collection of birth, marriage, and death records for New England dating back to the 1600s. Many of those records are available online at Ancestry.com. In fact, millions of them are. So we're going to talk first just about what states are included in New England. We're going to talk about how many records are available on Ancestry.com for those 6 states and what time period they cover. And then we'll take a look at some of the records themselves so that you know some of the nuances and the ins and outs of using them in your family history research. So let's dive in. Let's first talk about what states make up New England. We have a little joke in our family. My brother was dating a girl once, and he would give the girls he dated little tests or quizzes, and he'd ask them silly questions. And one of the questions he asked her was where the state of New England was, and she honestly believed that New England was a state because hey, they have a professional sports team, so they must be. In fact, New England is made up of 6 states, and the differences in sizes of representation that you're seeing here on the screen has to do with the amount of vital records that exist on Ancestry.com for these particular states. So you can see Massachusetts, of course, is huge there in the middle of your screen. We have the most number of vital records for Massachusetts. It's also had the largest population over the other 5 states over time, and continues to today as well. So some of this is just nature of the size of the state, the physical, geographical size of the state, and the population as it has grown over time. You'll see here Rhode Island, super teeny in the middle. That's because there aren't very many records that exist for Rhode Island, but that's because the population is not very large even today. So these are the 6 states that make up New England. Let's just take a look at some of the coverage that Ancestry.com has available on our website. You have it there on your screen, but let me just read through it really quickly, point out a couple of things. The first thing that you may notice is that with the exception of Vermont, every one of these states have vital records dating back into the 1600s. Of course, that's because New England is one of the earliest settled parts of our country, and they were excellent about keeping really good records. Usually those records were kept at a town level, but a lot of them have been aggregated now into statewide databases. The second thing you might notice is that they all have different ending years of coverage. Some states, like Vermont, have some fairly loose privacy laws, especially around death records. Some states, like Rhode Island, have a little bit stricter privacy laws around some of their records, and so they're not available as currently. Now, of course, this is the birth, marriage, and death records coverage, so not all records are available for this time period. In most cases, these ending dates here are for the death records. You'll find that privacy laws for marriage records and birth records actually mean that they are not available mostly in the 1900s. Sometimes you'll find some in the early 1900s. Now, the next thing you're going to notice here in this third column is the number of records that we have on Ancestry.com for that particular state in New England. As I mentioned, Massachusetts, the largest by far. As a matter of fact, we're talking almost 50 times larger than Rhode Island in terms of long-term population and records available. So we have 36 million records available for Massachusetts, 8 million for Connecticut, 5 million for New Hampshire and Vermont, 4 million for Maine, and then here Rhode Island comes in just under 1 million records at 750,000. So lots of records available, and hopefully you've had some time to explore them. If you haven't, we're going to talk about that right now. One thing I do just want to point out for those of you who are new to family search, there are a couple of words that sometimes we throw around in genealogy and we forget that new people might not always know what they mean. When we talk about vital records, what we're talking specifically about are birth, marriage, and death records. Now, sometimes we get some things like burials thrown in there as a type of death record, or divorce records thrown in there as a type of documentation for a marriage. But vital records are those core birth, marriage, and death records. It doesn't include things like censuses and tax lists and land records and all of that. So I use those terms interchangeably, birth, marriage, and death, and vitals, and you might hear that as well, just so you know what they mean. Now, let's talk about what information is available in the records you're going to see. First of all, some of the databases on Ancestry.com are only one type of record, and some of them are a combination, meaning some of those databases are going to be just births, just marriages, or just deaths, and some of them will be a combination of all three. It's not always easy to tell right off the bat. So I'm in the card catalog. If you haven't been here before, you just hover over your search button, scroll down to card catalog, click on that. It shows you all of the databases available online in Ancestry.com. Now I just filtered down to birth, marriage, and death records. I'm going to click on US. That's going to show me a listing of all of the birth, marriage, and death records in the United States. Now right here at the top of the list, or near the top of the list, let me make my screen just a little bit bigger for you. You're going to see Massachusetts town and vital records from 1620 through 1988. This single database has 23 million records in it. This particular database, because it says vital records, you can assume that it contains vital records for, or all three types of vital records, births, marriages, and deaths. As a matter of fact, if I were to search this particular database, one of the things that I would discover is that the event type is actually included in my search results so that I know what it is that I'm looking at. Whether I'm looking at a marriage or a birth, I don't know if there's going to be a death on this page. There's a militia record because that's a type of town record. No deaths on this page. So that the event type will be included in the index. And as a matter of fact, when I'm doing that, I can actually narrow it down to the type of event that I'm looking for based on which of the fields I fill out. So because I am looking at this Massachusetts Vital Records database, my search box actually includes birth, death, and if I scroll down a little bit, marriage. So depending on what information I fill out, that will determine what is returned in my search results. I also, at the very bottom of my search form, can say, you know what, I only want to see baptisms, or I only want to see burials. I only want to see marriages. You can narrow your search results to only see a specific type of record in this kind of a database because of the way that the database is created and because of the kinds of records that are involved in that. Now, I mentioned some of them are combination databases, meaning all vital records. Some of them are for a single kind of record. In this case, the main marriage records database, just marriages. If I scroll to this and look at this search box, you'll see I can only enter information about marriages. I can't enter information about births or deaths because this database is specific for marriages. Okay, so that's important information. Pay attention to the title of the database specifically so that you know what kinds of records are included in that database. Now, another thing you need to pay attention to is whether or not you're going to be looking at an actual image of an original or copied record, or whether you're only looking at an index. Some of the records are index only, meaning that's all that the state has provided to us. That's all that's currently available to us online. Now, when you see an index only kind of record, very often that means that there's an original record or a copy of an original record that you can order from the state using that index information. So again, you're going to want to pay attention to the database title most often to determine that. So here, for example, I've got Connecticut Deaths and Burials Index. It is just an index, which means there are no images to look at, but there is still enough information in this particular index to provide me with the information I need to order that original document if necessary. So in this case here, I've got a death record for a Maddie Beeman. She was 9 years old when she died, so her birth year has been estimated off of her death date. Here is her death place, and then the names of her parents. You'll notice there's no little image right here for me to click on and go view that. So pay attention to that title to know if you're just looking at an index or if you're looking at an original document. When there are original documents available, that always look at them. You never know how information might have been transcribed or mistranscribed. You also never know what additional information is on that image. The index that is created simply as a finding aid to help you get to that original document. And so very rarely is every piece of information on that image transcribed into the index. Again, the index is a finding aid, but if there is an original document, you want to look at that. And that's certainly the case in some of these index-only databases as well. If you can order a copy of the original from the state, always take the opportunity to do that, because you never know what additional information might be available to you. And that additional piece of information may be the very thing that helps you break through your brick wall. So some records are index only. Some records are images of copies of original documents. Okay, here's what I mean by that. So we're looking at this death index record for Maddie Beeman. Whenever you're looking at a record, I hope one of the things that you pay attention to are these suggested records over here on the right-hand side. Again, they're just suggestions, much like the little shaky leaf hints are just hints. Doesn't necessarily mean that this is your person, but these are records that bear looking at and analyzing and deciding if they really are for your person. So in this case, I've already taken a look at it. This Maddie Beeman here is the same, I believe it's the same Maddie Beeman. Here is, born in 1884, died in 1893 at age 9. This is actually a cemetery record. But again, in the title of the database, what you're going to see is it's a cemetery inscription, which means, of course, that somebody has gone through the cemetery records or looked at the tombstones themselves and inscribed those particular records into a separate document. In this case, it was actually a WPA work project. So you'll see that these are old typewritten pages. And if I zoom out just a little bit, here is Maddie. She is the daughter of Harley and Jenny, has her birth and death date. Now, again, even though this is just a copy of the cemetery records, this was created in December 12th of 1934. Like I said, it was a WPA project during the Depression. And so people went through and transcribed these, and then they were typed up, and that gave people work. But it still bears looking at the original of this image, because what you'll notice here is that Jenny and Harley, Maddie's parents, are listed on the same page. And so you see that they're likely buried near her. You can tell by looking at this document, this is not in alphabetical order. So my guess is, just knowing what I know about the way that some of these records get created, is that these are in the order that the tombstones appear, maybe row by row in the cemetery. Which means maybe I want to pay attention to some of the other names around who are buried around this family. For example, this Shove family here show up just next to the Beeman family, and we aren't exactly sure what Jenny's maiden name is, but she's using the middle initial S, and a lot of women use that middle initial, right? Oh, look, there's her maiden name. It's Shove. And so are these her parents? They're the right age to be her parents. They're buried right next to them. So you start to see clues to some of those other things that you might not have seen had you just been looking at just this index page. If there's an original image, even if it's a copy of original records, always look at it so that you can get some additional context and pay attention to the other people and the other records on the page, because you might discover clues to what it is exactly that you're looking at. Now, some records, blessedly, or maybe not, are images of original documents. And those are just gold when you can find them, and some of them do survive. Some of them, while not images of original documents, are actually contemporary copies, meaning the town records were put into a ledger or a register of some kind, and then the town or county clerk copied those same records into another book that they sent on to the state or the colony at the time. And so they're still copies, but they're contemporary copies. So here's the deal. When you're looking at some of these records, there are a few things that you need to be aware of. Let's look up, I think this is the right record. We're going to look at an Aaron Mack here. This is New Hampshire marriage and divorce records. And here I have a marriage record for Aaron Mack. He was married in 1785. And if I look at this particular record, what you're going to discover again is that there is an image, but this image is on this beautifully pre-filled form, and they've just filled in the information. Again, this is probably not an original. It's probably some kind of a clerk or clergyman or justice of the peace copy that was made for this particular 1785 marriage. But certainly this is better than nothing, and it does still provide you with some excellent information. In this case, the very specific ages of the bride and groom at the time of their marriage. So those kinds of records are fantastic. If I go back into these Massachusetts Town and Vital records, we'll see something a little bit different. So here is a birth record for Ellis Doty from 1677. If I look at this record, what you're going to see is it is, for most of you, probably going to be very difficult to read the first time out of the gate. If this is the first time you're seeing a record that looks like this, you might freak out a little bit. Don't. One of the things I've learned is that the more time you spend looking at these kinds of records, the more clearly you are able to read it. As a matter of fact, if you want to spend some time indexing records, that's a really great training for reading some of these old records. And you can do that through our World Archives project. Now, here is the page for the D's. You can see this letter D here at the top. What that tells me is that this is likely a copy of an original ledger, but because of the way in which the letters are formed, some of the fading on the page, I can guess that this is probably a fairly contemporary copy of this particular kind of record. And right here I see Ellis Doty. He is the son of Joseph Doty, and then he was born on the 16th day of April in 1677. So you learn how to read it. Again, don't despair if you can't, but always look at that original image just to make sure that the information here jives. Also, because you're looking for context for this record. The record just above Ellis Doty here is another son of Joseph Doty, this son being born in 1674, so an older brother of my Ellis Doty that I was looking for. Always look at the original image because it will likely provide you with additional context. The last image type I want to show you here, there are some states who just do such a beautiful job of recording information, and Maine is one of my favorites. It just has excellent records. And here's what here's the important thing. That's not the record I wanted to look at. I think it's this one. Here is the important thing to know about some of these records, in particular the Maine records. When you're looking at the original image, you're going to see, just like we did in New Hampshire, this filled out or this pre-filled form that they then just fill out, right? And most likely it's a copy of some of those original records. These records are so rich. So not only do I have the name of the bride and groom, I have the residence of the bride and groom, the age of the bride and groom, their color, their occupation, their birthplace, what marriage it is. In this case, it's the groom's first marriage and the bride's second marriage, whether or not they've ever been widowed or divorced. So it's the bride's second marriage, and she was widowed. That's important information because you know to go look for another marriage. It has the date that they filed their intention to marry, who married them, what that person's official station was. So in this case, they were married by a justice of the peace. However, if they were married by a clergyman, that will give you clues to what type of a church or what specific church they belong to so that you could look for additional records there. It has the date of marriage and the place of marriage, and you might just stop there if you didn't know that this particular form has a backside. And so always, when you're looking at original images, just check the next image just to make sure you're not missing anything, because in this case, the backside of that image provides full information about the groom's parents and the bride's parents, including maiden names of the mothers. So you don't just end up with the bride's maiden name, you also end up with the maiden name of her mother, birthplaces, and occupations and residence. So just this fantastic, fantastic record here, but if you didn't know about the backside of that image, you would miss it entirely. And that's a little bit heartbreaking, because here is 2, and in some cases with these maiden names, 3 more generations worth of information available to you. So always just use these little arrows down here at the bottom, click the next image, and make sure there's nothing else. So now here I've gone to the 3rd image. It's this front page of another record. If I go back, I see the back side of the card I'm looking at. Back one more, there's the front side of the card that I was looking at. And of course you can use all of these little image tools to make it bigger, smaller, drag your image around, but pay attention to those arrows and always check that second image if it exists, to see if it exists. Okay, let me just wrap up with a few just reminder tips and tricks. Use the card catalog. Yes, these records, most of them are, if the information you have in your tree and the information that we have in the record match, they may show up as a shaky leaf hint. If you do a search from your tree, yes, they will probably show up in your search results, but where is kind of a question sometimes. And if you know your family's living in a specific state, you can just go to the card catalog. You can filter by birth, marriage, and death, and then the fastest way to get to these is to put the state name in the title field. So let me just show you how that works. If I'm in the card catalog, let me reset all my filters here. Okay, I'm in the card catalog here. I'm looking at all 31,000 databases. I'm just going to click this little birth, marriage, and death filter over here on the left. And then right here in the title field, I'm just going to type in the state name of Massachusetts and click search. And now I am looking at 229 databases that contain birth, marriage, and death records for the state of Massachusetts, and have the word Massachusetts in the title of that database. So you'll see here's that 23 million set of vital records we talked about. There are also several very large databases containing just marriage records, or just birth records, or just death records. It's worth looking into those as well. It's possible that you will find that your ancestor was recorded both at a town level and at a state level. There may be some overlap there. Look at both records. Sometimes different records recorded in different jurisdictions contain additional information, or sometimes it's more clear to read it on one record than on another. So pay attention to the date ranges, and just because you find them in one database doesn't mean you won't find them in another database. If you're ready to look at another state, just type in the name of that other state. Now we're looking at the 21 databases that contain Vermont in the title and have something to do with birth, marriage, or death records. So that's how you use the card catalog. If you haven't used it before, I encourage you just to play around with it a little bit, get familiar with it. But that database-specific searching is going to be one of your more powerful tools. When you find a family member in a specific database, search that database again using just the last name and the location to see what other potential family members show up. Now, we all know that not everybody who has the last name is necessarily related. Last names were a construct of the Middle Ages in many cases, meaning they were sometimes just assigned or chosen by families, and so you can have families with no biological connection who share the same surname. But when you're talking about some of these smaller communities, chances are there's going to be some really good clues to some of those other family members. So you search a database, just come in here. For example, I can come in here to my Massachusetts database. I'm going to just put in the surname of Doty, and I want to see who else has that last name that was born in the same place he was born. And so I could put in a specific location to make that determination. Mark both of those exact and do that search. So you can do that as well. Again, just to give you a feel for other family members, other possible relationships that are available there. The other thing that you might want to do is pay attention to some of the other columns in your search results. So in this case, the parents are listed on these birth records, and you can see here I've got parents Ellis and Eleanor, and Ellis and Eleanor are the parents of Edward and Barnabas and John and Joseph, and the birth years of each of these children, 1705, 1707, 1709, 1712, lead me to believe that those are the siblings of Ellis, other children for this couple. Here's a daughter named Eleanor and another son named Elijah. It looks like this is a big family, right? So pay attention not just to the name column. So I did a search for Ellis Doty, but I also ended up with fathers named Ellis, and that helps me to group family members together a little bit better by paying attention to that information as well. Okay, hopefully that was a good introduction to you for about the New England Vital Records. They are just this really rich resource, and for those of us who are doing colonial research, they stretch back into the 1600s, and that's so fantastic to have this resource available to us. And we're talking about millions and millions of records for from the 1600s through today, that have that vital information, that birth, marriage, and death information that will help us build our trees and connect with our ancestors. And if you have a question, I will be posting the September live stream calendars later today, so you'll be able to see all the topics for next month. But if you have questions or if you have suggestions for future broadcasts, please send me an email at ask@ancestry.com. I read through all of those. Can't always respond to all of them, but I do read through all of those, and that's how I build these presentations, is based on the suggestions that you provide me about the research challenges that you're struggling with, or the kinds of things that you want to hear about or learn more about. Be sure later today or tomorrow to check the Ancestry.com Facebook page. Click on our events tab there to see the September calendar of events, and I will see you next time. Until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.